Good evening, everyone, and welcome to episode 21 of the Baby Bunting Live Series. My name's Mel, and tonight I am joined by Julie, who is the CEO of PANDA. PANDA is an organisation that assists new and expecting parents with the new mental and emotional challenges that they may face. Now, if you do have any questions specifically about the organisation, please leave them in the comments below and we will get back to you at the end. So, Julie, what does PANDA actually do?
Good question. So PANDA stands for Perinatal Anxiety and Depression Australia. Our core remit and the reason why we're here is to help Australians who are both expecting and new parents cope with that period of their life. We know that in general about 1 in 5 mums and about 1 in 10 dads are going to experience anxiety or depression throughout that parenting journey. And we're all about being there for them. So we support through our national helpline, tools and resources, and just generally training and education across Australia.
So what is perinatal anxiety and depression?
Good question. So perinatal refers to the period of both the pregnancy, so the 9 months of pregnancy, and the first 12 months of a baby's life. Traditionally we had postnatal and antenatal, and they're whacked together into perinatal. And you know, it's a really important time because we lead through that sort of pre-pregnancy period. Some of us have been trying really hard to have babies. Some have just fallen pregnant really simply. But either way, you know, you come to that with a whole lifetime and a story behind you, and you enter that period. So it's an important period of the mum and dad's life, and it's a space where people can both, you know, have the day-to-day struggles of adapting to that space and their experience. But for some people, they really do struggle in that period. So, you know, end up with symptoms of anxiety and depression in that time.
Because it is important to also highlight that these changes don't just happen to the mum, but also the dad, so you support them as well.
Yeah, most definitely. We do a lot of work with dads around Australia, also with same-sex couples. We know that, you know, in any family unit, there's pressures. There's pressures for those who are growing babies and there are pressures for those who are supporting.
Now, what would you say are the first sort of signs to get help? So if someone's never had a mental illness before, no one in their family ever has, should they feel confident that they won't develop the perinatal mental illnesses pretty much?
Yeah, look, I guess, you know, from my perspective as both a clin psych but also as CEO of PANDA, I think we don't want people to move through life feeling like they're going to be vulnerable and necessarily, you know, waiting to you know, develop a mental illness. That's not where we want people to be, because ultimately that places increased stress on their well-being. They become hypervigilant and looking for changes in their mood or in their day-to-day life. And that can, you know, develop stresses and anxieties in itself. But, you know, for people who have had no history of, you know, stress or depression, worry or anxiety, there's still the opportunity that they may develop this. And, you know, it's all based on how they cope with both the birth itself, the experience of a change in identity. You know, when we become pregnant, you know, the self-identity that we carry through our working career, into being a new mum or a new dad really does get disrupted and shaken up, and that's really hard for people to adapt to, you know, especially in the pace of the way in which we go through life nowadays. You know, we have such high expectations on ourselves and how we're able to cope in this period. So, you know, generally we find that people who haven't had a history may well still, you know, develop anxiety and depression during that period, or a multitude of other, you know, vulnerabilities throughout that time. But, you know, again, it's horses for courses and individuals in that period.
Yeah, it would be a major life change. So also, how can someone know if they're feeling to be something to be concerned about, and they're not just worn out or sleep deprived?
Yeah. So I think, you know, for the work that we do at PANDA, we speak to people every day, and they're, you know, on a continuum or a spectrum. So we may have people who are, you know, they're just experiencing a change that they feel is not their normal day-to-day way of coping or dealing with things. They're feeling a little bit hypervigilant to that change, don't feel like they're bouncing back, and, you know, we're all like rubber bands when sometimes we bounce back.
The
and
resilience.
sometimes, sometimes we get stretched out so hard. But we don't bounce back as easily. And so, you know, for some people, they're sort of not in that space where they'd be diagnosed as having a mental illness. For others, they're very much in a diagnostic space and they've been referred to us by a GP or a mental health provider, a midwife, child maternal health nurse, hospital. And for others, they've had a lifelong history of mental vulnerability. So they've had those struggles, they've gone through them, they've, you know, had the wonderful experience and sometimes not so wonderful of getting pregnant and becoming a new parent. And that mental health issue is still very much there. So we deal with the spectrum at PANDA, and, you know, we do find that people can, you know, get disrupted at any point of that. So there's no rules around it, but yeah.
Wonderful. Now, I know a lot of people will be watching tonight, not necessarily about them, but they're worried about a family member or a friend. What would you suggest to them on how to help them out?
Yeah, look, I think it's interesting, and one of the things that we often say is if you think it, say it. You know, I think we spend so much of our life thinking, I'll wait for the right time to bring something like this up, and we know that, you know, for many individuals, they ring the helpline or they reach out to us and they, you know, it was because somebody said something and said, you know, hey, how are you going? You seem to be struggling, or, you know, what happened just then, or whatever it was. And because they've already got that feeling that they're processing internally, it was that external reflection that connected with their internal experience, and that was what made them reach out for help. So I think, you know, the first thing I would say is don't stand back and feel like you can't have that difficult conversation, you know, and be okay with having it. Don't look for the right time. Say it earlier, because we know that the sooner we can support parents who are vulnerable or experiencing mental illness, the sooner they can get back onto that trajectory of feeling like a really functional parent, feeling they're able to cope and connect with their baby, and that's really important. You know, for most though, we want to be looking at the period in which they're feeling like they really can't bounce back. So if you've got a symptom of anxiety or depression, it's about, you know, not being able to sleep or sleeping too much, not feeling like you can eat or you have an appetite, or, you know, can be the other way, eating too much, withdrawing from social supports, not wanting to have sex, you know, not feeling like you're connecting with your partner or the day-to-day things that you would normally, not feeling a sense of joy, you know, feeling like you're often looking for negatives, you know. So if you're in that space where you really feel like that's been going on for, you know, 2 weeks, that's when we're saying reach out and get help.
Especially at the moment with all these changes happening with COVID-19, being a new or expecting mother would be quite scary as well. And a lot of people would notice you would already feel so isolated, and at the moment you would feel even more isolated. So definitely having that conversation with loved ones would definitely help.
Most definitely. You know, and when COVID hit, it was fascinating because we really did experience an increase in the number of people calling us straight away. The day that child maternal health nurses stopped visiting, our phone lines or helpline went through the roof in terms of calls, because people were just so distressed, and more of the what will I do if I need that support, rather than needing that support, so being preemptive. And, you know, for people who were pregnant, there was a lot of distress around, you know, who was going to support me. I sort of have built up to expect to go into, you know, a parenting group, so I'm ready for the birth, and that wasn't there. Interestingly too, we've actually had a lot more callers earlier in the baby's life. So usually we are seeing people calling PANDA at about 4 weeks of the baby's life, and now we've seen people call much earlier because those supports that were normally there haven't been. So it's wonderful to be able to be there as a service for mums and dads at that time. Even
just like mothers groups and stuff have all changed.
I know,
so all those little social supports that you usually get aren't there at the moment, unfortunately.
No.
So it's good that you guys are around so someone has someone to talk to.
Yeah.
So where do you go to get this help?
Look, I think essentially there's no wrong door, you know. It's about reaching out and finding support however you can. We always say, you know, that GPs, if you've got a GP, and we know that lots of people across Australia can't access their GP as easily, or there's big wait lists, or at the moment with COVID, you know, people can't connect up as simply. But reach out to your GP, have the conversation about feeling like you're not travelling as you normally would, or raise it with any of your child maternal health nurses, your midwife or the like, if you are feeling like you're struggling. And, you know, alarmingly, our research last year showed that about 80% of people who are struggling haven't told their GP or their child maternal health nurse, which is just phenomenal when you think about the fact that these people are so focused on that part of your life.
Yeah.
So we would like to see parents having that conversation and having it earlier. You know, again, any mental health professional, if you're already connected in the mental health space, is really beneficial to reach out and connect to. Friends and family, you know, flagging it with friends and family and, you know, giving them permission to act on your behalf if you don't feel like you can trust your flags and your confidence in terms of how you're travelling. But yeah, essentially no wrong door. And of course, PANDA. So we have, you know, our national helpline, which is available Monday to Friday, 9 a.m. till 7:30 p.m. And we've got people on the lines able to support, and if they're not there for you, as soon as you ring through, they'll ring you back. Or we have our national mental health checklist, which sits on our website, and that's a 30-question checklist that people can do from the comfort of their own home 24/7. And that gives you a bit of a read on how you're travelling, and at the end of it you can get a printout that you can take to your GP or have that conversation.
Wonderful. Do any of these resources cost money?
No, all of the resources that we have on our website are free to access. Our helpline is free to access. It's a Commonwealth funded initiative, and we have state and territory funding as well. So that it's fabulous they can access the helpline. In terms of GPs, you know, as we know, there is often out-of-pocket expense, although with COVID and tele sessions, then some of those are bulk billed. And then there's private access to psychologists. You would pay a gap fee or something, but yeah.
Wonderful. So as sort of like a scenario question, if someone's labour and birth didn't go as expected and they can't stop thinking about how bad it was, what can they do?
Again, you know, it's on a degree, you know, for most people, I think, because society builds up the expectation around childbirth to be such a miraculous thing. You know, we see it on packaging, we see it on nappies, you know, smiley, happy families. And for many people, they come out of their birth and feel like they were cheated because it was really overwhelming and it did go on forever, and, you know, but then there are those that also have really traumatic childbirth and, you know, may have never experienced anything overwhelming or traumatising in their life. And for people who have gone through that, if you've got any flags around it, and, you know, we say reach out for help straight away. If your capacity to connect, your capacity to feel like you're able to keep a train of thought is impacted as a result of the trauma that you're carrying, and, you know, trauma is a clinical word, but ultimately if you're having flashbacks, you know, of the experience, and they can be not just visual flashbacks but smells and sounds. If you find yourself sitting amongst the memory and reliving it or thinking about it or trying to work out how you would have done it differently or what supports you could have called on at that time, reach out for help, because again, that's taking up space in your world where you're not connecting with your family, and, you know, people can seek support and come through trauma in a really positive way, but it can take time.
Especially if you didn't go to their birth plans and things like that.
Birth plans, oh, they're a hard one. I had a birth plan, never came out of the box.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a hard one.
Yeah. So can perinatal anxiety and depression affect relationships?
Most definitely. I think, you know, one of the biggest things when people are experiencing any sort of, you know, psychological disruption during their parenting phase or any part of their phase is that it impacts on your confidence. And I think that the minute we have things in our lives as individuals that impact on who we think we are and how good at something we think we are, you know, we avoid everything. So, you know, partners included. You know, it's a really hard time when you're going through being a new mum or a new dad. You've got this new little person or people, if you've had multiple births, which, let's face it, many people do, and you suddenly have to split and divide and start, you know, bringing in this third little person into that space or more, and that takes significant time to adapt to. It disrupts your confidence, you know, and then your ability to connect. And we know that has a cost to, you know, intimate partner relationships, you know, your normal familial relationships, finding that time, and every relationship takes time. So I think, you know, just stepping back, remembering that even rocks crumble, it's okay to find that space. And a really good saying is you can't give from an empty basket. And I think as mums and dads, we try to do too much for everybody, and don't keep something for ourselves. So relationships are one where yes, they do get strained, but just having the conversation and talking about the pressure you're experiencing is the best thing, I think, in that environment.
It would be hard because you're trying to work out this new little person in your life, but then you see so many changes in your partner that you thought you already knew, and you're trying to figure them out at the same time.
Most definitely. And there's no rule book. There's
exactly.
no rule book.
No instruction booklet.
And when it's your first baby, parents often say, I never knew this side of them, or I never saw this side of them. And of course, because you've never had that maternal or paternal side brought out. So I think, it's really normal to feel like you're seeing a different side or you're having to cope with a different side. And, again, if it gets to the point where your relationship with your partner's breaking down, or violence is occurring, and, we know that when families or partners are under pressure, violence can occur in a family, and that's not okay. You need to reach out and seek help in those spaces and make yourself and your baby safe.
Absolutely. So just to finish off, we'll just do one more scenario question. So I've heard about other mental illnesses such as postnatal psychosis and postpartum psychosis. It sounds really scary, and I've noticed someone close to me who is a new mum having quite out of character, and I'm worried. How would I know postnatal psychosis, and what would I do to help her?
Yeah, so, thankfully, postnatal psychosis is relatively rare. We know that about 1 or 2 in 1,000 mums can experience it. And it's a space where people's behaviour becomes really different to what it had been historically, or in the past. So, they may become overly cautious. They may feel that somebody's watching them. They may be experiencing, hallucinations or delusions and think that they're hearing things that aren't there. Behaviour really becomes erratic. Can become quite happy one moment and then really crash and be really sad and down, and then have really big plans, and then those all fall through. And again, it's that usually family members that are tracking that this doesn't feel right, and that this person is really experiencing something that's not there, is where it's caught, and help is sought in that period. But it's really scary, and the person experiencing the psychosis during the perinatal period can become quite aggressive, can become quite upset and overwhelmed. They can try to harm their baby to protect their baby. So again, whilst it doesn't happen often, if you are experiencing those feelings yourself, or you see your partner or loved one, or your son or daughter, if you're a grandparent experiencing that, we recommend that people reach out for help.
Definitely, absolutely. And I think that's the key message to take home. If you're feeling any of these emotions that we talked about tonight, or know someone, please reach out to PANDA for help. They're always there for you. Nat, do we have any questions? No? Perfect. Well, thank you for your time tonight, Julie.
Absolute
It was wonderful
pleasure
to learn about PANDA. And please tune in next time for another one of our wonderful Baby Bunting Live series. Thank you. Have a good night.
Thanks, everybody.